We keep switching back and forth about who's doing what slide, so I'm starting, right?
Correct.
Okay, I'm starting. So the session is called The Agile Human, and it's about things that we've both done to try to take Agile practices and use them to get better at various aspects of the things that we do, either in personal or professional work. And before we start, we want to steal something of Colin, so Colin, thank you. This morning, we have completely violated whatever copyright protections you have, and I stole this picture off of Slack. Somebody else took it, not me. But this was my favorite slide from this morning, because this is exactly what we're talking about doing. So if you want to lead other people, the first thing you have to learn how to do is to lead yourself. So finding ways to tune up what you do and how you approach your work is a really big part of anything we do in project management, whether it's Agile or traditional. So we're going to talk about the different experiments that we've run, and we're going to help you get set up to run some of your own. Good?
No, terrible. So Dave and I started talking about this about 6 months ago, but going back, we actually met at this conference about 3 years ago. What Brett said this morning about networking being the main value of the conference, what we used to hear is you're going to learn as much from the attendees as you are from the speakers is absolutely true. So I would encourage you to make some connections. So we are both super nerds. I'm not the 0.001%, but I'm friends with Dave. And that's my claim to fame. We started thinking about what Agile methodologies, or can we leverage Agile as almost a philosophy to really better ourselves as humans, and sort of started pulling some strings together and really looking at Agile and specifically experimentation as a way to better ourselves. We come from really different backgrounds. We have really different perspectives. You're probably going to find this throughout our presentation. So we're hoping that you're going to come on this journey with us. We're going to walk you through some of the steps that we took, and you can come along for the ride. I hope everyone is very well caffeinated, because you're going to be active participants. Someone is. So just to get to know you guys a little bit before we talk about ourselves, just show of hands, who here works for an agency? All right, loads of people. All right, who's an in-house PM? Interesting, okay. Anyone is a consultant? Does anyone work for themselves? All right, a few people. Just at the front for some reason.
They're aggressive. All right. How many of you are doing some weird, jacked up, sideways version of Agile? Okay. Now, this is a really important question, because we have a bet going. How many of you are trying to use Agile in your own life, outside of work? Damn it. Thanks. Now we have a couple of bets that we're going to be going through throughout the presentation, and whoever wins has to buy drinks for the other person. So thank you very much for that. Let's see.
So what we're hoping that you're going to come away from the session today is some new perspective on how you can leverage some of the stuff that you use at work, or some of the practices that you've learned to actually better yourself. But hopefully you're also going to come away with some tangible tactics to apply that in your day-to-day. So Brett kind of stole our thunder here. But I've been doing project management for about 10 years. For a long time, I worked in agencies and startups, and now I work for a company called Shopify. I lead a couple teams, and really what has sort of brought me to focus on myself is looking at the human aspect of project management or product development. For a long time, I was really focused on just managing the work, and I sort of saw the people as a means to an end, if you will. So just a way of producing work. And my role transitioning to being focused on team leads and having a lot of one-on-ones, I'm really trying to be a pillar of support for my team members. And the main challenge that I have is that I am not great at being a human. So Tara had some really great examples about how empathetic she was earlier. And I have the opposite struggle. I will probably not ask you about your weekend. I am definitely going to call your baby it. And like multiple times in one conversation. My emotional range is like from tired to hungry. So this was definitely a learning curve, but I have found that it has been an interesting journey, and it's a whole sort of new way of looking at things. In my practice of managing work, I actually found a lot of the same philosophies apply to teams and people.
Aren't you going to explain to them what your experiment was on with your team, or is that later? So we're inspecting and adapting right now. I guess we're doing that later.
So you can tell we've practiced this.
We did practice it, because my whole thing's about my issue.
Yeah, so my focus was really becoming a pillar of support for my team. It's an interesting shift when you go from managing projects to helping people manage their own projects. And I really went on this journey trying to understand what my audience needs were, my audience being my team, and how I can make them more effective and more productive in their day-to-day work.
So how many of you are having a hard time with Agile? Okay, I had an awful time with Agile. I fought against it every step of the way. I didn't want anything to do with it. And I come from a PMP background. I used to teach that stuff to people. And when I kind of found myself out of reasons to not do it, and I started to do it, I found that it worked really well. But that journey was awful for me. So the work that I do with the teaching is all about trying to make that transition just suck a little bit less for other people. I don't think that I have too much trouble with the human aspect of it, but what happens with me is that when I show up to teach a class, I am completely invested in that. Like, I can wake up sick at 3 o'clock in the morning. I still can't wait to get into the room, because I'm going to be able to make that transition suck less for maybe one single person, and that's what I want to do with my professional life. The problem is that as I go through the day, I become more and more exhausted. I'm a total introvert, so at the end of the day, I'm completely spent. And if I'm gone 3 weeks out of the month teaching, whenever I get back home, I'm kind of a jerk. I'm very difficult for my family to deal with. And so that's something that I'm always trying to tune up. I take a lot of this stuff from Agile, and I use it in my life to inspect and adapt how I'm doing the other things that I'm doing. So when we talk to this stuff, that is one of the things that I'm focused on. So she's going to focus on work. I'm going to focus on stuff outside of work. And hopefully for you, somewhere in between the two, you'll find some experiments that you can run. So, good? Mm-hmm. OK. I need to check in and make sure we've met the definition of done for every slide.
Acceptance criteria met.
So now we're going to ask you to do something. Any time you're creating a product, vision is one of the most important things. When I'm teaching classes, I can't hammer that into people's heads enough. If you don't have a vision for what you're building and you're giving a team user stories, they don't know why they're doing it. They need some kind of context. And for what we're going to be talking about in here, we would like to ask you to come up with a vision for yourself. You might be building products at work, but with your life, you need a vision for the product of your life. What are you trying to do with that? Once you come up with that, you might already have that, but you're trying to figure out, am I actually hitting it? Like, am I getting the things that I need done? Am I having the improvement that I want? And for me, what I find is that there's times when I get this kind of itch. Like, this seems a little off. It seems a little wrong. My spider senses are tingling a little bit, but sometimes I'm just having an allergic reaction to food. And so that's a big part of it, too. Like in the last session, when Lena was talking about why, and somebody asked, how do you know if you're asking the right question? To me, it doesn't matter. Any question is good. If the question helps you understand that wasn't the right question, you're one step closer to the question you need to be asking. So this is a lot about that. Running experiments to figure out what it is you actually want to do and how you can get closer to meeting that vision is a really big deal. Another thing that's important about this is that we all make assumptions. I made some assumptions, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that there were certain things I needed to tune up in order to fix the way I am when I get back home so I could show up. And when I explained what I was doing to my wife, she said, that's not really a problem. We've already figured out how to deal with that. Well, so what if I want to be somebody you don't have to deal with when they come home, like as a husband? Like, that would be great if I could be bringing a little bit more to the table than that. Another problem with this stuff, and I'm sure you experience this at work, but people always seem to know what the answer is, and often they don't really understand what the problem is. Steve Jobs is dead. Okay? You're not Steve Jobs, neither are the people you work for. You might think you have the answer, this product that the whole world needs, but they don't know that they need it yet. But if you're not running experiments to test that stuff out and see if it really is the thing that the world needs or that you need, then you're in a very dangerous place. So we want to try to work through how to form some hypotheses, figure out how to test that stuff out, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And the other thing is that for this to work, you have to create a safe space for yourself. So that's a really big thing in the Agile community, is creating safety for the people you work with so that your team members are not afraid to run experiments, even if they fail. Right? We're going to try to do this thing in this sprint. Maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not, but there shouldn't be a penalty for failure, because failure is how you learn. So whatever you're doing to try to get better at, whether it's at work or in your life, if you're not failing, occasionally at least, then you're probably not learning the stuff you need to learn. So finding the experiments that are going to push you into an uncomfortable area is important, but we want everybody to feel like, there's no penalty for this. You should hopefully feel safe enough to try to do this. And we're going to ask for all of you to think in a few minutes about stuff you can improve. And this is going to involve people being vulnerable. So that's a scary thing for a lot of folks, right? Nobody wants to admit there's stuff that we suck at. That's why we have these name tags. Right? So we all suck at something. There's something we want to improve. And it's a really big deal. Now, for me, the hardest part about the whole experiment, which I'll explain in a little bit, was explaining to my wife and my daughter what I was trying to do. I have no problem being vulnerable in front of you or in front of my students. I'm like, yeah, I totally screwed that up. Thank you for that learning opportunity. But at home, I'm terrified of showing weakness. So that's a big challenge for me to try to work through. Having somebody that can help you test this stuff out is really important. So at the end, we're also going to ask you to partner up with some folks to help kind of hold up a mirror for you. And that was a really big deal when Mika and I started working on this stuff. And we'll talk about this in the presentation as well. There were things that I would explain, and she would say something back, and I'd be like, God damn it. That's another thing I totally missed. So it's a really important tool. I hope you'll be willing to find somebody else, someone in the room that can help be your accountability partner. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay.
Check.
I'm going to stand in the back now and not talk.
So my discovery process was a little bit different. I think, Dave, you really went for your personal life, so there's a lot of introspection. How I approached it is the product is not necessarily my life, I am the product. So if we're going to use product development methodology and apply it to ourselves, then I'm thinking of myself as the product. What features do I have that are pretty robust? What bugs do I need to fix? Are there extensions of my offering that I should really consider? That was
Sounds
weird
like you're
phrasing.
really dangerously close to a code of conduct violation.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to get slapped on the wrist. So in sort of the discovery, it's a little bit how you would approach product development or a project, right? You try to understand the context. You might do some research. You might do a competitive analysis. And user research is a big part of that. So I went to my team, who in this case are both my users and my stakeholders, and actually surveyed them and tried to figure out from their perspective what are the things that I was doing well. Because as much as you have blind spots, you might also not recognize the strengths that you have. What are the things that I'm doing not so well? What are the things that I'm failing miserably at? And got a lot of insight from them. Obviously, that type of conversation and that type of research really takes trust. But the interesting thing that I discovered is that it was also helpful to build trust. Dave and I talked about this on his podcast once, but the sort of best way to build those human connections is to be vulnerable yourself. And to really put yourself in a vulnerable position in front of your team encourages them to be vulnerable in return. So even asking, please tell me about my flaws, how can I support you better, how can I make your life easier, was actually a trust building exercise, which I didn't anticipate. As the nerd that I am, I also went to best practices. So in the vision setting experiment, or sort of discovery phase, I really looked at who do I want to be, right? What are the qualities of a great leader? What you're seeing here is a framework that really resonated with me. This is something that my colleagues have outlined. And it was really about looking at the map of great leadership and being able to clearly identify, this is what I'm good at. This, maybe not so much. And it helps you really identify your areas of improvement. So when you're setting the vision for yourself, I would definitely encourage you to look outside your own perspective and look what other people have done on this front. I see a lot of people taking photos, and I have no idea if I have the rights to this. So if I get fired next week, we'll know why. Okay.
All right.
First.
So.
Wait, sorry.
Okay.
Was that okay?
I think that was okay. You didn't tell them about what happened when you asked your significant other about.
Oh, yeah. So.
This is funny.
When I say include others in this, be deliberate about who you want to include. I made the mistake of telling my significant other that I was listing out my flaws. And he thought that was an invitation to participate in the exercise. It wasn't. Learned some things I didn't want to know. So careful consideration on your user selection when you're doing user research. Yes, we are still together. Yes, happily together, have yet to be fired.
We have a working agreement now, though. So I want to just mention one thing about why I focus on personal life. So a lot of people like to maintain a separation between professional life and personal life. Like, she has that. I don't. My whole life is just a big blur. And my wife and my daughter are the same way. But what I find is that while I am able to get to work and be like 100% there all the time, what's left of me, like I said earlier, at the end of the day is kind of like a wreckage. And that is an area where my professional life is impacting what happens to me outside of work. So I'm trying to think of ways that I can make adjustments so that what I do when I'm on the job is not going to necessarily have a detrimental effect after the job. What we're going to ask you to do now is just spend a couple minutes coming up with a vision statement for yourself. So it could be a sentence, it could be a couple words, but if you think of a more ideal version of yourself or a better version of yourself, something you'd like to evolve into, come up with an explanation of that. So that's the first thing. We're going to give you 5 minutes to do that. You've all got notepads and stuff you can write on, so please help us out. Hopefully you'll be willing to do this. I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes. All right.
Are we good?
Okay. We're going to inspect and adapt and reduce our time boxes from 5 minutes down to 3 minutes and see what happens. So the next thing that we want to talk about is you defining what your secret weapon is. So there's something about you that makes you very uniquely suited to do the work that you do. When Tara was up here this morning, she said she was talking about becoming a project manager, and the phrase that you used was, "I can do this." I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I had that moment too. But then there was a moment where like, oh, I'm good at this. Like, there's a different thing. Each one of you has something that makes you better than anybody else at the stuff that you do. And it's important to kind of figure out what that thing is. Like, if I had to define it for work, what makes me really good at teaching Scrum to people is that I come from a traditional project management background. I had a miserable time finding my way to Agile. And so when I teach classes and they're full of project managers, that's why I'm in that room. And I have a ton of empathy for anybody who struggles through that. And I can be there for those people in a way that a lot of my friends who are trainers that teaching this stuff who only come from an Agile background or a development background, like, they hate project managers. They're always like, oh, they keep asking these stupid questions. Like, yes, send them to me. I want those questions. I am very uniquely skilled in that area, and it's something that other people don't have. So what is your secret weapon? What is the thing that makes you better at what you're doing than anybody else?
Yeah, another way to think about this is, I think you described it as your superpower.
Yeah. And then we got into a big, long conversation about superheroes and comic books that she couldn't participate in. So
no idea.
That was depressing.
No idea. If you think about this in product terms, it's really your unique selling point. If you look at your surroundings, if you look at your colleagues, what is it that sets you apart? What is it that makes you particularly well suited for the role that you have or the role that you're after? So how do you define your unique value?
You guys good? You all have your superpowers defined? Your secret weapons?
This is a hard dependency to move forward. Good?
All right, I'm going to stop using this timer because it's not helpful. Okay, so if you have a secret weapon or you have a superpower, there's something that threatens it. If you think about the best code that's ever been written, there's always weaknesses and vulnerabilities in that code that can be found and can be exploited. So if you think about your secret weapon, the next thing to think about is, what are the bugs in your secret weapon? What are the things that threaten to cause it to not be a secret weapon anymore, cause it to not work, right? Prevent it from being useful.
In Dave speak, what is your kryptonite?
No, kryptonite's the bad example. If you're into comic books, it's the Green Lantern trying to use his ring on yellow stuff.
And I deeply regret bringing this up. Whatever he said. So, we've sort of built up your egos now, and here's the time to destroy it. Really what we want you to do is really think about listing your flaws. What are those areas of improvement? What are the things that you know you're not great at? One maybe positive spin to think about is think about the people in your life who you admire. What qualities do they have? Often what we strive for are the things that we don't necessarily have. So you might want to think about the best people that you've worked with, the people that you look up to. What are those core qualities? Those are probably things you want to work on. Okay, so you might have a lot of features that you want to build, things you want to enhance, some bugs you want to fix. But one of the core Agile principles that we try to apply to bettering ourselves was the idea of prioritization. Prioritization is really about focusing your energy. When we think about managing projects, we think about finite resources, right? So you might have a really hard deadline, or the client's budget absolutely cannot be exceeded. If you think about bettering yourself, you also don't have unlimited resources. You have no energy, you're totally wiped out from work, you have so little time, you're trying to balance out family. So what little time and energy you have, where are you going to focus that to really maximize the impact and demonstrate progress to yourself? When it comes to product ownership, you will often hear prioritization based on business value, right? That's the sort of core principle you want to follow.
It's about value, man.
Dollar signs. When it comes to yourself, your task here is really to understand how you define value. And what I found is there was a little bit of a nuance with the things that I valued and the things that my team valued. Because my vision statement was about helping the team, I really needed to balance both of those things out. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what my experiments look like. Has anyone used Airtable before? More than one person.
No, it
Point,
wasn't more than one
please.
person. It was
Come
the
on,
majority.
lift your hand high.
Nope.
I am winning this one.
You are not winning that one.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Airtable,
You use Excel like the rest of the world.
this is a relational database with a nice interface, or a real fancy spreadsheet. So I used Airtable to run my experiments. And the first thing that I did was sort of create a taxonomy of terms to ensure that the experiments that I was running were actually aligned with my vision. So if you go back to that leadership framework, I actually tried to make sure that I was focused on certain key areas that I needed to improve. Before we move on to the next slide, you might notice something here.
You're not supposed to call it out.
I have to. It's
can't.
not Dog
You're
the
not
Bounty
allowed.
Hunter. It's a dog dressed as Dog the Bounty Hunter. No, I'm actually calling out the experiment specifically. Public speaking is an area of improvement for me. So I had to do a few dry runs so I wouldn't faint up here talking to you guys. A couple other things that I did to prioritize my experiments was assign internal and external value. So I tried to bring some objectivity to this process by looking at how much I cared about improving something or developing a certain aspect, and how much the team cared. There were certain areas where there was some large discrepancies, but if I looked at the total value of the points, it was clear what I needed to prioritize and what I should focus on first. And the last principle that I use, this is actually the same cards, but just a different view than the list that we just looked at. And, sort of following Kanban philosophies. Kanban?
Kanban.
Kanban.
Kanban is how you're supposed to say it.
Okay, so.
Not Scrum.
I think we both lose that one. the idea is that you really want to limit your work in progress, right? So again, it's about that focused attention. It's about demonstrating that you're moving forward. And I sort of often think if I'm going to work on 10 things at once, realistically, I'm going to work on one thing, and then personally feel like I'm failing at 9 things. So ensuring that I sort of time box my experiments and I was able to really dedicate and focus my effort and attention before moving on to the next thing was also incredibly helpful.
All right. So am I supposed to take that marker? You're holding it like it's a pointer. Okay. So now I want to ask you to organize your list of bugs, right? And try to prioritize them. Now, how many of you came up with a number of bugs that you want to fix? Okay. How many of you only had one?
Everyone had many.
Okay.
Very
so you've
self-aware.
got to limit your whip, you've got to figure out which is the one that you're going to focus on the most. So you have to prioritize them. Now, she's got a very fancy way of scoring it. I was a little more lo-fi about it because I really only had one thing. Or one thing that I already knew was kind of top of mind. But you've got to pick the thing that you think needs attention and the thing that you think you can move the needle on. Because if it's something you know is impossible, that's not really going to help you so much. Something where you think you might be able to have an impact or you have an idea of how you might go about trying to have an impact.
So I see some people sort of going to the pen right away. If you're not sure about what you should focus on as your top priority, you might want to think about what is your prioritization criteria, right? So the number of people who are going to be impacted by this change, is there some kind of deadline associated? Are you moving into a new role? Are you just coming into a role? Think about the external factors, and that might actually help you prioritize. The other thing is, it doesn't mean that you won't work on the rest of the list. This is just the first thing that you're going to work on.
And so then what we're going to ask you to do, which I don't think it's going to take you 2 minutes to do, or should we, am I going too fast?
Are you
It's
guys
too late
ready?
now.
Does everyone have the one thing that they want to work on?
Okay.
Not yet.
All right, so we'll give you a
couple
minute.
minutes.
I'm excited. What are you scoring now? I think you're cheating.
Kanban. Kanban?
All the Japanese people tell me to say Kanban, and I don't call it that anyway. I still say Kanban. All right, are you ready now? So maybe to help create a safer space, we can get some examples from people. So Brett volunteered. Brett, what do you suck at?
Saying no.
Saying no. Okay. Where's Abby? She volunteered too. What do you suck at?
Being a planner in my personal.
Okay. Anybody else from the front row?
Me?
Either, both of you. Yes.
Okay. Speaking without thinking.
Okay.
Oh my God, mine is stepping back before going forward. High fives.
See, vulnerability helps you connect.
We were worried that people would be afraid to share this. So what we're going to ask you to do on your name tag is write your name and write the thing that you suck at. So I suck at protecting my time, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But first, write that down on your name tag and proudly affix it to your shirt or whatever you're wearing on the top of your torso. All right, so here's what we want you to do next. Now that you have proudly declared what you suck at, we want you to find a stranger in the room and talk to them about why you suck at the thing you suck at. So when we were getting ready, she actually made us practice this, which you probably can't tell, but we did practice it. Mika referred to it as you're confessing to the other person, this is why I'm bad at this thing. So I am going to set the timer. You got about 10 minutes. Find a stranger, somebody you don't know, talk to them about what you're bad at. All right. So now it's time for me to explain what my experiment was and how I ran it. So I didn't have all the kind of structure that Mika had with hers. I had like a vague sense of what I wanted to fix and what I thought I needed to do to fix it. It's important first to come up with a hypothesis. So you have this thing that you think you suck at, and in a few minutes we're going to ask you to try to figure out a way you could run an experiment to test how you could start making improvements in that area. So you don't have to fix the whole thing. Just one thing you could test, does this have an impact? Is this going to increase the value or whatever it is, however you want to think about it? And then keep inspecting and adapting and running experiments. So the thing that I'm working on, I've actually been working on for a really long time, but I did kind of lock it down a little bit more for the purposes of having something to put up on the screen when we did this. So one of the things, Brett mentioned that I do the podcast. So what happens for me when I'm traveling, which is 3 weeks a month, I teach for like 9 hours, and I don't know, how many of you classify yourself as an introvert? Raise your hands. Okay, so what happens for me at the end of a day of class is I'm physically in pain because I've been interacting, like so focused on this for so long, this interaction, that it's like, it's really hard. And I get back to the hotel, and I usually can't even like call my wife for like an hour or two. I'm just like that drained. And I have to do podcasts at night. So often I'll take like a couple hours off, and then I'll stay up working until like 2 o'clock in the morning. And then I got to get up at the crack of dawn and do it again the next day. So that keeps happening over and over and over again. And it's been going on for years like that. And I love the work that I do. So that's one of the things that I learned a long time ago with another experiment that I ran was I feel burdened by all the things, but they're all things I chose to sign up for. And they're all things that I'm like, if I took a second, I'd be like, you know what, that's awesome. Like I get to interview all these people, and that's wonderful that they're willing to share their time with me and I can learn from them. And I love teaching and all the stuff I learned from the people in the classes. So I like doing that stuff. But I was thinking that if I found a way to protect my time a little better, at least protect my recovery time in the evenings, that when I got home, I'd be less of a bastard. Like I'd complain. What happens is, like, how many of you travel a lot for work? Raise your hands. So when you get home, the reentry's tough, right? Because like if I'm gone all week by myself, it's just all about me. Like everything is me. And I get home, and now there's 2 other people, and I'm like, no, it's all about me. Like, why is the dishwasher loaded this way? That's wrong. Like, you've been gone a week. Like, I don't care. It's all about me. So I have to make that adjustment. And I was thinking that if I was less exhausted when I got home, I'd probably be better at that. Right? Maybe that would make it more tolerable. And maybe my wife wouldn't say things like, no, we figured out how to deal with you when you get home. Which is like, that just like, kind of sucks, right? So this was my hypothesis, and I'm trying to figure out ways to test it. So I ran 3 experiments. I had 3 trips in a row with a couple days in between, and there were different things, different adjustments I was going to try to make to limit the amount of work I did at night so that I had hopefully more energy when I got back home, and it would work out a little bit better. I also wanted to have a way to measure it. Now, I'm constantly trying to tune up how I do the things that I do and how I protect my time and stuff like that. But it's mostly just me doing sort of like an internal retrospective. But for the experiment, when we were talking about, well, how are we going to measure it, and Mika mentioned that she asked her team, I was like, well, crap, I got to go ask my team. And that, for me, was the scariest part about this whole thing. Because I had to sit down with my wife and daughter and be like, look, here's my hypothesis. Yeah, and that's when she said, no, we figured out how to deal with it. And I was like, no, there's got to be a better version of me in here somewhere that I can bring to the table. So what I did was I created an evaluation form. And I asked each of them to fill it out at the end of each trip so that I have some kind of data that I could use. All right? So I'm going to show you the data and talk about what happened.
For the record, this is Dave's version of Airtable.
Yes. Because I'm old and lo-fi. So they filled these out. Now, I asked them to fill it out after each trip. Each fill it out separately. My daughter only did it once, the first trip, and then she didn't do it again. And so this was a really big thing for me because from the last session about how do you know if you're asking the wrong question, Katie didn't fill it out again. I'm like, oh, this is a total failure. Like, my kid won't even do this. But then I took some time to think about, like, okay, well, what am I really working on here? What's really the issue? I thought, you know what? There's not a thing that I'm trying to fix here between me and my daughter. Like, even if I'm exhausted, we just hang out. We go to the comic book store, we watch movies together. It's fine. That's not really a rough spot. I mean, yeah, I'm a little cranky, but that I can kind of work through. So it was really more about me being there for my wife, like showing up and being a good husband and being present and not complaining about a bunch of stupid stuff when I get home, which is what tends to happen. So that's what I was trying to figure out. And I'm trying to look at my notes because I have so many words on this page. I should have inspected and adapted that. So one thing that happened was I had this survey, and they filled it out. And we were talking about the session. And in terms of having an accountability partner and how valuable that could be, Mika asked me to read the questions to her. And I did. And there's this long pause, and she goes, those questions are all about you. They're not about your family at all. And I looked at him, God damn it. Like, yes, because it's all about me, right? None of this is about their perception or how they feel. It's all about me. And so that was another thing that I learned. I didn't want to learn that, and that's one of the things that happens with experiments. Like, I find that I will run something, and it'll teach me something I really don't want to know. Like, I don't want that to be the answer. But that wrong answer, or that answer I don't want to hear, is critical to figuring out what the right questions to ask are. So that was a really powerful thing for me, too. And so these are the results of my wife for those 3 trips. And what happened was, across these 3 trips, I got better and better at protecting my time at night and recovery time, so that I could, just go back and play my guitar in the hotel room and go to bed at a reasonably decent hour, get a fair amount of sleep, and be okay the next morning. And across those 3 trips, I felt better and better each time I came home. And I felt really good about it. I'm like, this is awesome. I'm going to be able to go stand up in front of all these people and be like, I ran an experiment. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father than I was before I started. And then I got my wife's results, and I looked at them, and they went in the exact opposite direction. So this is my wife's results against my results. So the first trip, I was the best. She said I was I said I was the worst. She said I was the best. Last trip where I thought I was the best, she said I was the worst. Also, very important thing, sometimes your results are super irritating. Because this taught me something else. Either my question is flawed, or my hypothesis is flawed, or maybe really this is just something that doesn't actually need to be fixed or can't be fixed. Maybe it is just, if you travel, when you get home, there's going to be rough spots for a couple days. And then it's fine. Like 3 days, it's all good. So that was a really big deal, is getting clarity on the difference between my self-perception and the perception of the people, my customers, right? My wife and my daughter. And that was a big deal. So now I've got to go back and run other experiments to figure out what I can do to try to ease that re-entry thing when I get home and still maintain my ability to do the stuff I need to do when I'm away working. So.
Thanks. We obviously sort of held ourselves accountable to running experiments. And I really tried to look at different areas of focus and run experiments that were aligned with those things that were flaws or bugs or features that I wanted to enhance. A really critical thing for me, because I was actually gathering input and feedback from 4 people on my team, I wanted to make the evaluation process as objective as possible. So I outlined an acceptance criteria. So how could someone really tell if I was doing something effectively or if I was improving, which I'll walk you through in a second. I think Dave made an excellent point about learning lessons you don't want to learn. Some of the feedback I got was not even necessarily relevant to the experiment I was running, but there was some really sort of harsh truths that I needed to hear, right? And that helped inform where I was going to focus my attention next. So in the same way that you develop a product, I think there is absolute value in failing early, failing often. They say failing forward. There's no point that you're not going to learn something when you're having that external output.
You can use the word pivot. That would be a great place to throw the word pivot into the conversation, just if you wanted to get all lean startup.
I feel micromanaged, guys. So on this particular experiment, I had essentially the description or the scope of the experiment was about providing quality feedback and asking for feedback. And how I phrased my acceptance criteria was questions that my team members could ask themselves. So, did you provide feedback? Were you asked for feedback? And I tried to phrase it in a way that was easy to understand. Dave also made a good point about making the feedback mechanism easy for people. It's hard to get people to evaluate you, so keeping it as simple as possible, I think, is very important. In my case, star rating. I didn't have a lengthy questionnaire. It was just a star rating and comments if you were so inclined. Some of them were rated pretty high. I did not screenshot the ones that were rated really low. But it was also really interesting to see when the team members were aligned and when they weren't. So clearly I wasn't putting equal effort in. And I'll talk to you about some of my failed experiments when we're wrapping up the talk. Now, I know what you're thinking. These screenshots are making my eyes bleed. Why the pink? I just got to match it to my ride, guys. All right, next.
Okay, so what we'd like you to do is to outline one experiment you can run on the thing that you've decided you suck at that you want to focus on. One of the things... Calm down.
So excited.
One of the things that I find is really helpful when I come to conferences, and this is actually how I met Brett. We met a while ago at South by Southwest, and he led a session about project management. And at the end of the session, I asked if any of the other project managers there would be part of a daily stand-up with me. Because when I go to conferences, I usually have a small team of people, and we have a daily stand-up every day because I find that if I commit to somebody else, I'm going to do this thing, and then I have to check back in with them. That's a really important thing. Anything you can do to try to get more value out of every minute you have at a conference like this is really important. So we're going to ask you to come up with an experiment that you can run, and we'd like you to think about how you could run it during the rest of your time here.
So the first thing you want to do is really craft your hypothesis, right? Which is, you know the thing that you want to fix. Now, how are you going to fix it? So in your case, it was about protecting your time, and it's going to make you more present at home. The thing that I suck at is being patient. And Dave can attest to this, because we worked on these slides together. So a hypothesis might be, if I take 20 minutes a day to meditate, then I will be more patient with my team. When I get really stressed out, I tend to project that impatience on others. That hypothesis might be flawed. I might need to think about another way. I might need to work on clearing my calendar, not working overtime. There's a number of things that I can actually do in tangible terms to increase my patience or not project my impatience, but the hypothesis is really about what can you do to move the needle on that thing that you want to improve.
So form your hypotheses.
Hypotheses?
That's the plural, as far as I'm concerned.
I learned something today. English is not my first language.
I'm ready.
Are we ready? Ready? Okay. So now we know what we want to work on. We have an idea of how we want to work on it. The next thing that's really important in any experiment is to set the constraints. So how do you get to something shippable? It's essentially what you're defining is your sprint in a lot of ways. You want to think about the time frame that you want to set. So is this something that you want to focus on for a week, maybe 2 weeks? What can you do in the next 24 hours to actually actively start working on your experiment? The success criteria. So how are you actually going to measure whether this is a success or a failure? And what goes hand in hand with that is, are you going to ask for external input? So are you going to ask anyone for feedback? Is there anyone that you work with or anyone in your life who can help you determine if you're making progress? And the best thing that you can do for your experiment is to try to define it in very, very concrete terms. So we're not going to get into SMART goals, but for example, when I was running the experiment about providing feedback, I time boxed it to 2 weeks. And I really tried to ensure that at least on one occasion, I went out of my way to ask for feedback from every single person on the team. So 4 times I had to ask someone for feedback on something specific, and I tried to provide feedback 4 times. That's very tangible, it's measurable. I could tell if I was doing, that I was making progress. I couldn't evaluate the quality of that feedback until I received feedback from my team, but I tried to make it as tangible as possible. So we'll give you a couple minutes to think about how much time are you going to spend on this experiment, how do you define it, and who's going to help you evaluate if you're successful.
Are you ready?
I hope you're ready. You're going to have to share it
All right,
with
so what we're
someone.
going to ask you to do is with the person you just shared, you confessed what you suck at, to meet with that person and ask that person if they're willing to be your accountability partner. And they could say no, and then you'll have to go find someone else. But if they say yes, that's a really important thing. Okay, so if I ask someone to be my accountability partner, what I'm actually asking them to do is to keep me honest with something. So if I say I'm going to do X, and I don't do it within the time frame, I expect you to chase me down. I can't commit to something to 100 people, but if I know one person's going to come looking for me, I'm going to do that thing. Right? So what we'd like you to do is to define something you're going to do in the next 24 hours, something in the next, what do we say, in the next week. Okay? So commit to something over the next week, something over the next 24 hours, share it with your accountability partner, and then that person, if they're willing to be your accountability partner, their job is to check back in with you. How did this go? What did you learn from it? Did it work out the way you wanted to? And you will do the same for them. So I'll give you a couple minutes to go back with whoever you met with before, or if you need to find a new partner, that's okay too. But share with them the experiment you're going to run over the next 24 hours and the one you're going to run over the next week to try to make improvement on the thing that you suck at. You got to finish up.
And I'm going to have a cocktail. What?
Or several, apparently.
Several cocktails.
Okay.
All right.
So we're full of biases and assumptions, and you can't avoid that. That's one of the reasons it's so important to have an accountability partner. So if you leave this room with nothing else, it should be with guilt and fear. Your accountability partner is going to hunt you down.
Sorry, did you say you grew up Catholic?
Yes. And I'm also grew up in Philly, so self-hatred is part of the operating system. So that's why my thing is all about me and what I'm doing wrong. So I want to just share, we're each going to share kind of our takeaways from doing these experiments. So for me, there was a couple really impactful things. One of the first things I realized when I had to go ask my wife and daughter if they would do the survey was, it occurred to me that when I'm running experiments, which I'm always doing, if the thing that I'm doing is not making me slightly uncomfortable, if I'm not pushing myself into a space that feels a little awkward, then maybe it's not really an experiment. Maybe I'm just trying to prove something that I already decided is right. So that's become kind of a thing for me to pay attention to. I think if there's things that are broken, it's important to take responsibility for them. Like I have to admit, yes, I work too much at night, I'm wrecked when I get home, and that is completely my fault. Those are choices that I've made. So I don't want to walk around in my life like, oh, I have to do this thing, oh, I have to do that thing. I'm the one that chose to do it, right? So if something is busted, it's because of me. One of the biggest things about this that I learned was that things that I think are happening, they're not necessarily happening. There's stuff I think is true, and then I can like put it in front of my wife, and she's like, what the hell are you talking about? So we all see things, and they're all influenced by our assumptions and biases and stuff like that. So having somebody or some way of getting a mirror held up to your face can be a really important part, because what you think the problem is may not be the problem, right? And what you think the solution is might not be the solution. One of the most important things that I learned from Mika on this when we were talking about it, I was talking about how hard I was working at this, and I was putting in all this time trying to figure out ways to tune it up and to keep the work kind of at bay when I got home. And she said, it doesn't really matter how hard you work at this. It's only about the impact that it has. And that was a really big thing for me too, because I tend to give myself a lot of credit for spinning my wheels.
No one cares.
Right, they don't. Right? If your team works super hard and can't deliver, can you go to your customer and be like, listen, it's not ready, but we've worked super hard, so can you just pass?
I've actually had this in demos. I don't know if anyone has experienced this working with clients, but it's, I've definitely had team members explain the entire process and how many hurdles there were and how much effort it took to overcome all the bugs. Really, no one cares. All they care about is the product. Everyone cares about the outcome.
And so the other reason this was such a big deal for me is because when I'm teaching the Scrum classes, I'm like, there's 0% and 100%. I can ship or I can't ship. I don't care about how many hours you put in. I'm like, oh my God, I have to actually do that in my life now too. That's a drag. You have to be prepared for stuff that you might not want to learn, right? There are things that I picked up along the way that I wasn't really too psyched to have to come to grips with, but that's an important part of running these experiments. And it's all about inspect and adapt. And I made a joke about pivot, but if any of you are familiar with Lean Startup, This is basically trying to apply that kind of practice to your life. Whether it's work or how, your personal life or how the two things intersect, we can't just inspect and adapt the work that our teams deliver. If you want to lead other people, you've got to lead yourself. You have to be inspecting and adapting everything that you do, constantly trying to get better at it. And it's more about the things that you learn than it is about winning and proving yourself right. So that was a really big deal. And I guess the last thing was that the accountability partner thing, somebody to help you figure out how you are poisoning your own experiments with your own bias. That was a really big deal.
Yeah, I think this idea of, continuous improvement is something that sort of resonated with me. Your product is never finished, right? You need to adapt with the market. You might move into another team where what made you unique before is actually kind of commonplace, right? So what you need to work on and what you need to focus on is actually should keep evolving. And what we're hoping to do is give you some perspective or some tactics to help that continuous improvement process. What I found really interesting when we started talking about the lessons that we learned along the way is that Dave and I have pretty different backgrounds, perspectives, different jobs, but we actually learned a lot.
Different countries.
Different countries.
Sorry.
We learned a lot of the same things. So the things that really resonated with me was, being very purposeful about setting your vision, I think goes a long way. Great products are not built by accident. They're not a series of coincidences. They are very calculated, right? You think about, your market positioning, and you look at your competitors, and you think about where you want to be and how, do you want to be a 100-year company? Or do you want to make a big splash, right? So being deliberate and strategic about the moves that you make for yourself, I think that in itself really went a long way. And that's something that transcends even just the experiments. I think it's more of a mindset shift for me. Impact does not equal effort. Effort does not equal impact. I guess it goes both ways. What my most failed experiment is actually when no one realized I was running one. So I tried to run an experiment to be more inclusive and be more open-minded, particularly in meetings. So I don't make a lot of time for people to state their opinions. And I really suck at that. So no one noticed that I was trying to make an effort. I need to try harder.
Or it wasn't a problem.
Or it wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
It actually, it was a little bit of both. So we've gathered some resources. This is stuff that's really helped us sort of shape a perspective. I put a direct link to my Airtable, so you guys can, I'm going to be real vulnerable.
Both of you Airtable users can go.
Yes, all three of us. No, but you can actually use it for inspiration, or if you want to use it as sort of a template to run your own experiments, feel free. We'll share these slides on Slack as well. And this is the part where Dave makes fun of me for not having Twitter.
Yeah, she doesn't have Twitter, but she's been looking at Twitter while we're standing up here.
It's true.
She does use Instagram, though. So this is our contact stuff. If you want to contact us, we're happy to talk to you about any of this stuff at any point in time.